Our opening thought are the words that were adopted in relation to the shared value of transformation at the most recent General Assembly last year. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Our next reading is from Bell Hooks, from Writing Beyond Race, Living Theory and Practice. When we are more energized by the practice of blaming than we are by efforts to create transformation, we not only cannot find relief from suffering, we are creating the conditions that help keep us stuck in the status quo. Our next reading is from Thich Nhat Hanh, his work Transformation and Healing. We should not try to escape from our pain. We should look at it directly. Looking at suffering deeply, we will have deep insight into its nature, and the path of transformation and healing will present itself to us. This morning, we're continuing our reflections on our shared values in Unitarian Universalism that were recently adopted at the UUA General Assembly in 2024. The last 3 times I was with you, we looked at the values of interdependence, pluralism, and justice. And today I'll be reflecting on the value of transformation. In describing transformation in the UU shared values, the General Assembly adopted the following language, which I read a few moments ago, but I'll read again. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. This affirmation recognizes that the people who have done the most to change the world for good have also been the most open to transformation of their hearts and their minds, realizing that they are never complete, never perfect, can always be better, can always do more, can always be changed to bring about more love and justice within our world. The way to a good society, much less a great society, is never through the hardening of our hearts or through the closing of our minds. It comes through relationships of love and justice, and through a self-examination that leads to personal transformation for the sake of the transformation of the world. I'm currently teaching moral and social philosophy this semester, like I do almost every semester at Oklahoma City University. And that means every semester I reread Plato, and I reread the dialogues from Plato about the last part of Socrates' life, his trial for impiety and for corrupting the youth of Athens. Those were the 2 charges made against Socrates. And also read about his death by execution as it's portrayed in Plato's dialogues. And it struck me as I was rereading these dialogues about Socrates this time that Socrates was killed for similar reasons to what has led us to our current situation in our society, an unwillingness for people to admit that they do not know what they think they know, and a oftentimes violent resistance to admit individual and societal shortcomings. and to make any effort to learn from them and be transformed for the better. If you've ever read Plato's dialogues about Socrates, you know that they are in dialogue form, and Socrates is usually the main character of those dialogues, and Socrates enters into dialogue with his interlocutors about a number of subjects. And this method of discourse that Socrates has with others in these dialogues has been given a name. You know you have made it in the history of human thought when a name for a way of discourse is named after you, and it is the Socratic method. The Socratic method. Those of you who may have grown up watching Paper Chase, both in movie and television form, saw the Socratic method displayed by that scary professor in the Paper Chase in a way that was often terrifying for the students, because the Socratic method involves asking difficult, probing questions that end up highlighting the fact that you don't know what you thought you knew. And the proper response, the response that would lead to transformation, that would lead to one becoming a better person, is to thoughtfully think through those questions and ask oneself, well, why did I think that I knew that? Why did I have this mistaken view of myself, this mistaken view of reality? And what can I do to come to a better view? What can I do to come to a point of having more self-knowledge and better knowledge and wisdom about the world around me? But that's difficult to do. And we know that when Socrates did that, Plato portrays him as getting quite a bit of pushback, a lot of pushback. People became defensive when he asked these questions and pointed out that they didn't know what they thought they knew. People sometimes became evasive, and sometimes they even resisted him with violence, and ultimately the violence of execution, of putting them on trial, for getting people, especially youth, to ask difficult questions of those who were in power. See, Socrates saw that wisdom is not just knowledge. Wisdom is the synthesis of knowledge and virtue. And that kind of wisdom is not possible without humility. One must be willing to be humble in their search for truth, in their search for self-knowledge, in their search for wisdom, if they are going to have the kind of self-transformation that is needed for them to become fully what they are meant to be within human community. That's a wisdom that I wish more persons in my faith tradition of Christianity would embrace. There's so many Christians in the United States right now that are conflating the wielding of power to control others, to control those who they deem as a threat. They're conflating that understanding of power with, quote, good leadership. And by doing so, they are embracing the logic of Herod rather than following the way of Jesus. You may remember the story of Herod. When Jesus is portrayed as being a young child, Herod gets word that there's a king that has perhaps been born, and goes after all the young children, all the young boys that were born in a certain area, because he deemed them as a threat. And he was wielding his power to maintain his power, and became violent in doing so. So those who conflate the wielding of power to control those they deem as a threat with good leadership are following the logic of Herod, not the logic or the way of Jesus. Being in power is not the same as being a good leader. A good leader helps others move towards a good end that brings positive value into our world. A good leader is focused on bringing about positive transformation. A good leader does not simply exude strength, does not simply wield power. A good leader encourages others to be transformed into better and more loving persons within community, rather than seeking to divide persons from each other by scapegoating those perceived as other. It's important, I think, to recognize that some of the persons who have brought the most positive transformation in the world, if we look at history, have been viewed as losers in their lifetime. They were losers. Many of them lost their life. They were often crushed and many times killed before their work for transformation came to full fruition. But the seeds that they planted later found fertile ground. And that fertile ground allowed love and justice to grow. I've always thought it's better to be a loser for love and justice in this life than to be a winner for fear and hate. Change should never just be for the sake of change, but rather for the sake of something better. And if it is not for something more loving and more just, it is not for the sake of something better. If our means for bringing change into the world do not reflect the ends we are pursuing, we will likely never come close to attaining them. Winning and being in power are not the same as bringing about positive transformation. It is clear that our society and the world that we live in need to change. But we cannot lose sight of the importance that the change that we seek should be guided by love and justice. You know, in political campaigns, the candidate, it's often said that the candidate who wins is the candidate who is perceived as the change candidate. You've heard that many times before. But if the change is not guided by love and justice, it is not the change that we need. If it's not guided by love and justice, the transformation we create will undoubtedly be change for the worse and lead us farther away from realizing the vision of beloved community. As I was reflecting on transformation, I started to reflect on some of my own experiences of transformation. Sometimes I get depressed about the fact that it seems like no one can change. No, everybody's locked in to their views. They've dug in and they just can't seem to change. How is transformation possible in a context like this, where everyone is so divided and so locked into their own views? But when I reflected on my own experience, I realized that the most significant changes in my perspectives on how I thought that I should be and act in the world did not come about as the result of convincing arguments. They did not really come about as the result of people just challenging my ideas and entering into argumentation with me. Rather, they came about through transformative relationships. Positive change and transformation for me came about more through transformative relationships than through arguments. And I experienced a fairly significant transformation in my youth and very young adulthood, a transformation from fundamentalism to a more inclusive faith that was made possible by relationships. In college, relationships with a close Muslim friend whose witness for love and service changed my understanding of Islam and persons who were Muslim. As he stood next to me in a food pantry helping others, and in a kitchen helping to feed others in Corpus Christi during spring break. It was kind of like an epiphany, a revelation that my views about persons of other faiths needed to be rethought, needed to be challenged. Also in college, persons that I came across and became friends with who were LGBTQ+. Also in seminary, changed my understanding of what sexual orientation and gender identity was all about, a view that was much more conservative until those relationships helped me see things differently. And of course, also as a fundamentalist, I had a pretty interesting view about Unitarian Universalists at the time, and it wasn't through arguments that my views changed. It was through relationships with my own family, especially in this regard, relationships with my dad, who was a Unitarian Universalist, and both my parents were charter members of the Lawton Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, which later became a church. I was transformed in my understanding of non-Protestant Christians during this time by relating to persons from Orthodoxy and from Catholicism and from other perspectives that were different from my own. When I spent a semester with 51 different Christian students from 33 different countries and 15 different Christian traditions, living together, eating together, working together, yes, sometimes arguing with each other, but the transformation came primarily from the relationships. I came to have a different perspective on all of the faiths, not just Islam in relation to my friend in college, but all of the faiths, especially from relationships that I developed in India, where we were involved in 7 weeks of interfaith dialogue with persons who were Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian. In all of these settings, relationships were the key. Relationships were the key for me in experiencing transformation. And maybe that's why persons and powers who are benefiting from the status quo and who do not want us to experience positive transformation are working overtime to keep us from cultivating those relationships with one another, are working overtime to keep us divided from one another rather than experiencing these transformative relationships with each other as members of one world house. May you leave this time together changed. May the promises you have made to yourself about who you want to be feel closer to the reality of who you are right now. May you share that feeling of transformation wherever you go. May it spread into every word, deed, thought, and interaction until we are all changed, transformed, and transforming together, becoming our better selves.